I heard her whisper just as I reached the hallway. "He'll be out soon enough." My wife didn't even flinch, just kept pouring champagne like Margaret had commented on the weather. "I'm David Easton, 52 years old, been making custom furniture in this Kentucky town for 30 years. You work wood long enough, you learn to listen. Every creak tells a story." This creak was different. I'd been out in the shed since dawn, sanding a maple cabinet for the Hendersons. My hands still smelled like sawdust when I walked through the back door. That's when I caught it. Margaret's voice, low and certain. Claire just nodded, poured another glass. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, like the walls had moved in while I was gone. Claire's mother sat at our table like she owned it, her purse balanced on her knees, always ready to leave, never actually going. "Evening, Margaret," I said. She looked up. No surprise, no guilt, just that thin smile she'd perfected over 23 years of marriage. "David, working late again?" Claire handed her the champagne. Their fingers touched longer than they needed to. Some kind of signal I wasn't supposed to catch. But I'd caught it. "What's the celebration?" I asked. Claire finally looked at me. Her eyes were different, distant, like she was seeing through me instead of at me. "Mom's prayer group raised enough for the new church roof," she said. Margaret raised her glass. "God provides." I watched them toast, watched Claire smile, the one I hadn't seen in months. When was the last time she'd smiled at me like that? When was the last time her hand had touched mine? The question hung in the air before I realized I'd said it out loud. Claire's glass stopped halfway to her lips. Margaret's smile flickered. "What?" Claire asked. "Your hand," I said, voice flat as planed wood. "When's the last time it touched mine?" She didn't answer, just stared at me like I'd spoken in tongues. That's when I walked to the hall closet, pulled out the small camera I'd mounted on the shelf, set it down on the kitchen table, right between the champagne and Margaret's purse. "David, what are you—" I pressed play. The screen lit up, color footage from behind my workshop, clear as daylight. Claire's cardigan, the blue one she'd worn to church last Sunday, bright against the maple trees. Her laugh, soft and familiar. Reverend Jonah's hand in hers, fingers intertwined like they'd done it 1,000 times. The intimacy that used to be mine. Claire went pale, white as fresh pine. Margaret said nothing, just set her glass down and stared at the screen. In the footage, Claire rested her head against Jonah's chest. He kissed the top of her hair, gentle, comfortable, like they'd been practicing. I'd seen enough, picked up the camera, walked toward the door. "David," Claire started. "I'll be in the shed," I said. Didn't slam the door, didn't raise my voice, just closed it behind me, quiet as a finished joint. Outside, the October air bit at my skin, felt good. Real. The kind of cold that wakes you up instead of numbing you down. Through the kitchen window I could see them. Claire's shoulders shaking, Margaret's hand on her back rubbing circles, comforting her, protecting her. How long had they been planning this? How long had I been the problem they were solving? I walked to my workbench, picked up the sandpaper I'd left there, ran my thumb across the grit. 220 grade, smooth enough to finish with, rough enough to start over. The camera footage was just the beginning. Some marriages die fast. Car wrecks and shouting matches. Others bleed out slow, one small cut at a time. Mine had been bleeding for years. I just hadn't noticed the bandages, but I was noticing now, and tomorrow I'd start building something new. Not furniture this time. Something that would last. Some marriages end fast. Mine had been ending quiet for years. I just didn't notice. The changes started small. Claire stopped bringing coffee to the shed around Easter. Used to be, I'd hear her footsteps on the graveled path every morning at 7:30. A cup of black coffee and a quick kiss on the cheek before I fired up the table saw. Then one day, the footsteps stopped. I told myself she was busy, church committee meetings, her mother's doctor appointments, easy explanations for hard truths. But the coffee wasn't the only thing that disappeared. Margaret started showing up more often. 3 times a week, then 4, always with some excuse. Bringing casserole, checking on Claire, helping with the garden. But her car stayed longer each time. Her voice got louder. I'd come in from the shed to find them whispering at the kitchen table, conversations that died the moment my boots hit the porch. What were they planning? 2 weeks after the champagne incident, I caught Margaret in the living room. She was standing by the refrigerator, holding something in her hand. When she saw me, she shoved it into her purse. "What was that?" I asked. "Nothing important," she said, "just cleaning up." I waited until she left. Checked the fridge door. The photo of my mother was gone, the one from my parents' 50th anniversary. Mom in her blue dress, Dad's arm around her waist. The last picture we took before the cancer. Margaret had thrown it away. I found it in the trash, crumpled but not torn. Smoothed it out on my workbench, set it in my toolbox where it belonged. That night, I heard them talking in the kitchen, low voices, careful words. I stood in the hallway, listening. "I don't hate David," Claire said. "I just never felt seen." Margaret's voice was softer than usual, almost gentle. "Jonah sees you, and God sees Jonah." "But David's a good man." "Good isn't enough, honey. You need light. Light, light. Like I was some kind of shadow blocking the sun. Maybe I was quiet. Maybe I kept my prayers to myself instead of shouting them for everyone to hear. But I'd built this house with my hands, paid every bill on time, never raised my voice or my fist. When did quiet become a sin? The answer came the following Sunday. Margaret invited Reverend Jonah to dinner without asking me. Just announced it after church, like it was already decided. "Jonah's coming by around 3, she told Claire, loud enough for me to hear. "I made that roast he likes." The roast she made, in my kitchen, with my wife nodding along like a trained dog. Jonah arrived right on time, tall, silver-haired, with hands that had never held anything heavier than a hymnal. He shook my hand and looked me in the eye like we were old friends. "David," he said, "beautiful work on the church pews. You've got God's gift in those hands." I thanked him, sat at my own table while he blessed the food. Margaret watched me during the prayer. "Still not praying out loud, are we, David?" Her tone was light, teasing, but the message was clear. You don't belong here. After dinner, I excused myself, told them I had work to finish. Nobody protested. But instead of going to the shed, I drove to Walmart. Bought a trail camera, the kind hunters use to track deer. Small, weatherproof, motion-activated, legal as sunrise. I mounted it behind the workshop, hidden in the split trunk of an old oak tree, angled it toward the clearing where Claire used to bring my coffee. The spot I'd seen in the first footage. If they were meeting there, I'd know. The camera ran for 3 days before it caught them. I watched the footage on my laptop, alone in the shed. Claire appeared first, walking slowly through the trees. She looked nervous, kept checking her watch. Then Jonah emerged from the other side of the clearing. They didn't rush toward each other like teenagers, just walked together, comfortable and easy. That was the part that broke me. Not the hand-holding, not even the kiss. It was the comfort, the way Claire laughed at something he said, the way she rested her head on his chest like she'd found her place in the world, the way she'd never looked at me. I closed the laptop, sat in the silence of my workshop, tools hanging in perfect order, wood shavings swept clean, everything in its place. Everything except my wife. That's when I remembered the wedding binder. Claire had kept it in the closet upstairs. Photos, receipts, flower samples, all the pieces of a day that felt like someone else's memory now. I hadn't looked at it in years. I found it under a stack of old quilts, dusty and forgotten. Inside, between the catering menu and the guest list, was an envelope I'd never seen before. My name was on it, but the seal was broken. The letter inside was dated 10 years ago, 2 months before our wedding. Margaret's handwriting, careful and precise. Claire, Don't do this. He's too quiet. He's not light. Jonah sees you. Don't marry silence. I read it twice, then again. Margaret had been trying to replace me from the beginning. 10 years of marriage, and she'd been working against it from day one. I didn't cry, didn't curse, didn't even crumple the letter. Just folded it back up, put in the envelope, set it exactly where I'd found it. Some truths don't need rage. They just need acknowledgement. The next morning, I called my cousin Ray. He runs a print shop in Frankfurt. Been digitizing old photos and films for 20 years. I need some technical help, I told him. What kind of help? The kind that makes things crystal clear. Ray didn't ask questions, just told me to bring the footage by after 5. His shop smelled like ink and paper, reminded me of my dad's old office. Ray cleaned up the camera files, enhanced the audio, burned everything to a USB drive. High definition, he said, handing me the drive. Clean as a whistle. He looked at me for a long moment. You're building something, huh? Not furniture this time. I pocketed the USB. Something that'll last. On the drive home, I stopped by the church. Thursday prayer group met in the fellowship hall. Margaret had been leading it since Pastor Williams retired. The secretary was locking up, but she knew me. I'd built half the cabinets in the building. Need to sign up for something? She asked. Prayer group? I said. I'd like to bring the media setup for Thursday. Maybe share some thoughts? She smiled. Margaret will be so pleased. And Reverend Jonah always attends. Your wife, too. Perfect. I drove home with the USB in my pocket and a plan taking shape. Clear as finished oak. Strong as mortise and tenon. Thursday was 3 days away. Just enough time to prepare. They thought I was furniture. Something quiet. Easy to ignore. Until I moved. Tuesday morning, Claire cornered me in the kitchen. Her face was tight, worried. Margaret must have been talking. What are you planning? She asked. I buttered my toast, took a slow bite. A little clarity. David, I'm serious. Mom heard you were asking about equipment at the church. Equipment? Like I was plotting to steal the communion silver. Just volunteered to help with the prayer group, I said. Thought it was time I got more involved. Claire's eyes narrowed. She knew me well enough to smell trouble, but not well enough to stop it. Since when do you care about prayer group? Since I realized how much it means to you. She stared at me for a long moment, trying to read between the lines, but I'd been practicing silence for 30 years. Some secrets are worth keeping. Wednesday night, I loaded the TV into my pickup, borrowed it from the church secretary, told her the fellowship hall's projector was acting up, which wasn't exactly a lie. Everything in that building was acting up, including the people. Thursday evening came clear and cold. I arrived at the church early while the parking lot was still empty. Wheeled the TV in through the back door, set it up behind the podium where Reverend Jonah would stand. The irony wasn't lost on me. By 7 o'clock, 12 people had gathered in the fellowship hall. The usual crowd, Mrs. Henderson, the Patricks, old Mr. Williams, who'd been coming since the Carter administration. Margaret sat in the front row, her Bible open and ready. Claire arrived 5 minutes late, slipping in through the side door. She spotted me immediately. Her face went pale when she saw the TV, but it was too late to leave now. Reverend Jonah entered at 7:15, his silver hair catching the fluorescent light. He smiled at the group, that practiced warmth he'd perfected over 20 years of ministry. Good evening, everyone. Shall we begin? He moved to the podium directly in front of the dark screen. I thought tonight we might focus on forgiveness, he said. How God calls us to forgive those who've wronged us. Margaret nodded. Beautiful topic, Jonah. David, Jonah called out. Would you like to lead us in prayer? Every head turned toward me, expectant, patient. Actually, I said, standing slowly, I brought something to share first. If that's all right. I walked to the TV, pulled out Ray's USB drive, slid it into the port on the side. Just some thoughts on seeing clearly, I said. Jonah smiled. Of course. The floor is yours. He stepped back, gestured toward the screen like he was presenting me with a gift. Lord, he began, bless this gathering, and the screen flickered on behind him. Color footage, crystal clear. The clearing behind my workshop in perfect detail. Claire's blue cardigan was the first thing people noticed, bright against the autumn trees. The same cardigan she'd worn to last Sunday's service. Then they saw her face, her smile, her hand intertwined with Jonah's fingers. Jonah's voice died mid-prayer. The room went dead silent. 12 people staring at the screen like it was showing them the face of God. Mrs. Henderson gasped, "Oh my!" On screen, Claire laughed at something Jonah said, rested her head against his chest. He kissed the top of her hair, gentle and familiar. The footage was 18 minutes long. I'd let it run for 3 before Claire burst through the fellowship hall doors. "Turn it off!" she screamed. But nobody moved. They were transfixed, watching their reverend hold another man's wife, like she belonged to him. "You followed me?" Claire's voice cracked. "You're trying to ruin me?" Mrs. Flannery, 73 years old, sharp as a tack, looked up from her hymnal. Her voice was calm and cutting. "That's his backyard, Claire, and that's the sweater you wore last Sunday." The room stayed quiet, waiting. On screen, Jonah was whispering something in Claire's ear. She threw her head back and laughed, free and unguarded, the way she used to laugh with me before the silence became a sin. Jonah stood frozen at the podium, his mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The man who'd preached about forgiveness every Sunday for 2 decades couldn't find a single word. Margaret grabbed her purse, stood up without looking at anyone. "We're leaving," she announced, but Claire didn't move. She was staring at the screen, watching herself be happy with someone else. "Turn it off, David," she whispered. I reached over, pressed the power button. The screen went black. The room stayed silent. "I think that's enough sharing for tonight," I said. I unplugged the USB drive, slid it back into my pocket, walked to the back table where I'd left my contribution to the potluck, Margaret's favorite apple. I picked up the tin, headed for the door. "David!" Jonah's voice was barely a whisper. I stopped, turned around. He was still standing at the podium, but he looked smaller now, older, like the weight of his own hypocrisy had finally caught up with him. "I can explain," he said. "No need," I replied. The footage was pretty clear. Mrs. Henderson spoke up from the second row. "How long has this been going on?" Jonah opened his mouth, closed it again. "Long enough," I said. I walked out into the October night. The air was crisp and clean, no lies hanging in it, no whispered plans or secret meetings. Just the truth, finally out in the open. Behind me I could hear voices rising, questions being asked, chairs scraping against the floor as people stood up to leave. But I didn't stay to listen. I had my answer. That was enough. I drove home with the windows down, the USB drive in my pocket and the empty pie tin on the passenger seat. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Claire's car was gone. Good. I needed the quiet. I walked to my workshop, turned on the lights, looked at the tools hanging in perfect order on the pegboard. Chisels, planes, sanders, each one in its place. Tomorrow, I'd start building again. But not furniture this time. Something new. Something that would last. I pulled out the USB drive, held it up to the light. Such a small thing to carry so much weight. But that's how truth works. Doesn't matter if it's carved in stone or burned to a drive. It's still the truth. And the truth, as they say, will set you free, even if it takes 30 years to find it. The workshop was quiet, just the way I liked it. For the first time in months, the silence felt like peace instead of punishment. I set the USB drive on my workbench, right next to the photo of my parents. Both of them were exactly where they belonged. She said she never felt seen. Now they couldn't stop looking. Claire became a ghost in her own town. I'd catch glimpses of her at the grocery store, always in the early morning when fewer people shopped. Her cart half emptied, her head down, moving through the aisles like she was afraid of her own shadow. Nobody said her name anymore. Not out loud, anyway. The first Sunday after the prayer group meeting, Claire's spot in the choir stayed empty. Mrs. Patterson, the choir director, didn't even mention it. Just redistributed the sheet music like Claire had never existed. 23 years of Sunday mornings. Gone without a word. I sat in my usual pew, third row, left side, and watched the congregation pretend nothing had changed. But the glances said everything. Quick looks towards the empty choir loft, whispered conversations that died when I walked past. Small towns have long memories and short patience for scandal. Claire stopped coming to church entirely after that. I'd drive past our house, my house now, legally speaking, and see her car in the driveway, curtains drawn, no lights on even after dark. People still brought food. Mrs. Henderson left a casserole on the porch Tuesday morning. The Williamses dropped off fresh bread on Wednesday, but nobody knocked, nobody stayed to talk. The food was charity, the silence was judgment. Both messages were clear. Jonah lasted 2 weeks. He announced his resignation on a gray Thursday morning, reading from a prepared statement that fooled nobody. After much prayer and reflection, he said, standing at the same podium where his betrayal had been exposed, "I feel called to step away from pastoral duties for a season of personal growth." Personal growth. Like adultery was a hobby he'd picked up. Elder Morrison accepted the resignation without comment. The congregation voted unanimously to accept it. Even the people who'd known Jonah for 20 years didn't fight for him. That's the thing about trust. Takes decades to build. Takes minutes to destroy. Jonah left town the following Sunday, packed his sedan and drove south toward Tennessee. I heard from Ray that he'd taken a job at a hardware store in Nashville, selling nails and paint to strangers who didn't know his name. Good. Let him start over somewhere else, somewhere his reputation couldn't follow him. Margaret lasted 3 days after Jonah left. I was replacing a window frame when I saw the moving truck pull up to Claire's place. Margaret directing the movers like a general commanding troops, loading boxes and furniture with military precision. She didn't look toward my workshop, didn't wave goodbye, just climbed into her Crown Victoria and followed the truck out of town. Ray heard she'd moved in with her sister in Ohio, some suburb outside Cleveland where nobody knew about Kentucky or prayer groups or the daughter she'd tried to save from silence. The church never invited her back, not for potlucks, not for funerals, not even for Christmas service. Margaret had orchestrated the whole affair, but in the end, she paid the same price as everyone else. Exile. 3 weeks after Margaret left, I found a note in my mailbox. Church stationery. Elder Morrison's careful handwriting. David, you stayed still. But they heard you anyway. Sometimes the quiet ones speak the loudest. Hope you find peace. Tom? I folded the note, put it in my toolbox next to my parents' photo. Some truths are worth keeping. Claire's letter came on a Friday in November. No return address, but I recognized her handwriting on the outside. I opened it in my kitchen, read it standing by the window where I could see the empty bird feeder she used to fill every morning. David, I didn't mean to hurt you, but I needed to feel alive. You were a good husband. Maybe that was the problem. I needed more than good. I needed fire. Jonah saw me in ways you never could. That's not your fault. It's just who we are. I'm sorry it ended this way, but I'm not sorry it ended. Claire, I read it once. Then again. She still didn't understand. It wasn't about being seen. It was about being honest, about keeping promises, about showing up every day and doing the work, even when the work was hard. Especially when the work was hard. I walked to my workshop, fired up the wood stove, fed Claire's letter to the flames. Then I pulled out Margaret's old letter, the one from 10 years ago, the one that started it all. Don't marry silence, she'd written. I fed that to the fire too. Both letters curled and blackened, turned to ash and smoke, nothing left but memory and the faint smell of burning paper, nothing left to say. The following Monday I drove to Frankfurt, met with the lawyer Ray had recommended, Filed for legal separation, not divorce. Any particular reason? The lawyer asked. Just want distance, I said. No alimony, no property disputes. No arguments about who got what. Claire could keep the house. I'd build another one. Start fresh on the 10 acres my dad had left me outside town. The paperwork took 20 minutes. 30 years of marriage reduced to signatures and filing fees. But that's how endings work sometimes. Not with explosions or courtroom drama, just with the quiet click of a pen and the shuffling of legal documents. I drove home past Claire's house, her house now, and saw the for sale sign in the yard. Fresh paint, professional lettering. She was leaving too. Good for her. Maybe she'd find what she was looking for somewhere else. Maybe fire was easier to maintain when you didn't have to face the ashes every morning. I parked in my driveway, walked to my workshop, looked at the pegboard where my tools hung in perfect order. Tomorrow, I'd start building again, a new house, a new life. Something built on solid ground instead of shifting promises. Something that would last. The workshop was quiet, just the way I liked it. For the first time in months, the silence felt like victory instead of defeat. Some battles are won without firing a shot. You just have to know when to stop talking and start building. She left the albums behind. I only kept one photo, not her face, just the bench I built. Claire moved out on a Tuesday in December. I was at Ray's shop when the truck came, helping him with inventory. Came home to an empty house and 3 photo albums stacked on the kitchen counter. 23 years of birthdays and anniversaries, Christmas mornings and summer vacations, all the moments we'd thought were worth keeping. She'd left them for me to sort through. Or throw away. I carried the albums to my workshop, set them on the bench where I'd been planning my next project. Dark walnut cabinet, simple lines, strong joinery, the kind of piece that lasts. I opened the first album. Our wedding day stared back at me. Claire in white lace, me in a rented tux. Both of us young and certain about forever. Forever had lasted longer than most, but not long enough. I flipped through the pages slowly, looking for something worth saving. Most of the photos were staged, posed smiles and forced celebrations. The kind of memories you create because you think you should. But near the back of the second album, I found it. A candid shot from 5 years ago. Evening light filtering through the maple trees. Me sanding a garden bench I'd built for Claire's birthday. Focused on the work, lost in the rhythm of wood and grain. Claire was in the corner of the frame, blurred, walking toward the house with a basket of laundry. She looked happy, peaceful, like she belonged there. Maybe she had, for a while. I tore the photo carefully down the middle, kept the half with the bench in the evening light, the half that showed the work instead of the woman. The rest went into the wood stove with the albums. 23 years of photographs curling and burning, smoke and ash and the faint smell of melted plastic. Some men burn the past, others build over it. I chose to build. The walnut cabinet took 3 weeks to complete. Mortise and tenon joints, hand-rubbed finish, no shortcuts, no compromises. Before I attached the back panel, I glued the photo fragment inside, hidden where nobody would ever see it, not as a memory, as a measure. A reminder of the man I'd been, the work I'd kept. I sealed it with 3 coats of polyurethane, let each one dry completely before applying the next. When it was finished, I closed the cabinet door. The wood clicked shut with a solid sound of perfect joinery. Inside, the photo was safe, protected, invisible, like the best truths always are. I stepped back, looked at what I'd built. Clean lines, honest construction, something that would outlast the storms and scandals, something that would still be standing when the people who'd caused the trouble were long forgotten. The workshop was quiet, just the way I liked it. Tomorrow, I'd start on the house. Foundation first, then walls, then a roof that wouldn't leak when the weather turned, building something new on solid ground. Some men burn the past, others build over it. I knew which kind I was.